Okay, so in this video, we're going to look at using Quarto to create documents using R code or output from R code. So we're going to start by creating a new Quarto document. So if you go to your File menu, under New File, one of the options should be to create a Quarto document. And so you're going to select that option, Quarto document, and it's going to give you this pop-up menu where you can fill in some information. What kind of title do we want to include here? This is a practice document, so I'm just going to call it practice document. We can put in our author name, your name, and then you can specify what you want to what file type you want to convert this to. You have quite a few options for documents. You can convert this to an HTML page. You can convert this to a PDF or a Word file. You can also create PowerPoint slides from this, or you can create some kind of interactive, shiny document. We're going to go with the HTML file. If you create an HTML file and you view it on your browser, you can always print it to a PDF, and you can always change the style of document that you want to change it to at any time. So that's what we're going to start with. I generally don't recommend creating an empty document until you are very familiar with the Markdown code. Let Quarto help you out here. If you've ever used R Markdown before, this is basically just the more recent version of R Markdown. Now, when you are done creating your file, you're going to want to convert it to the appropriate document type. So the engine here is just specifying what kind of knitting function you want. If you have Anaconda and Jupyter Notebook installed, you can use Jupyter. I'm in R, so I'm going to in R Studio, so I'm going to stick with the knitter. And you do have the option of working with or without the visual markdown editor. Again, if you're new to this, I encourage you to keep the visual markdown editor active. And then when you're ready and you've filled all of this information, you hit create. Now, it's going to generate, when you're using the visual editor, it's going to generate a sort of example for you. It's going to have some of the header code up here, and it's going to have some sample content that we can then replace as we go with the stuff that we want to include. You can also look behind the scenes at the source code, which can be useful for just kind of figuring out how all of this is working. So if you click over to source, it's actually going to give you the raw code. You could open up just a regular R file, and you could start typing this stuff, and it's going to you're going to be able to render it at the end as a R Markdown or Quarto document using that knitter package that I mentioned earlier. You can, of course, always work in Markdown directly if you want, instead of the visual editor. When I first learned this, I had to do it all in the original source code. But you'll notice that things like these double hashtags, they're not comments, they're headers in Markdown. And if you want to see like links, you have to put them in these angle brackets and things like that. And then you have these sections where the code goes, and you have these like triple quotes, these triple back apostrophe things. And then you specify the code style that you want to use. We're an R, so this is an R default, but you can also incorporate things like Python and other programming languages in here. We're going to add a code chunk later so you can see what some of those other options are. But then again, you close the triple quote thing and it will cancel that out. Echo is going to either be false or true, and that's going to either allow you to print your outcomes to the page or not. If you don't need the outcome then you don't have to, you can set it to be false because then um, it won't print the code, only the output. But if you want to see the code also, then it will also print out the code. So depending on your need for the document that you're creating, you can toggle these things on and off as we go, and we'll see some examples of including it or not including it. Now, for our purposes, we're going to work in the visual editor. But again, it's just getting oriented in what's going on. Now, for this particular document, I am going to essentially build a document that allows us to plot various distributions, a normal distribution against the t-distribution of various degrees of freedom. And so I want to not only include the code in the document, because it's like you can think of it like a tutorial explaining how to do these simulations and plotting these curves against each other. I actually want them to be able to see the code. And so I'm going to include a command called include so that it's not echo, it's not reprinting the code in the output, it's just including the code in the document. And then we're going to go through and we're going to set up a little bit of code. And then ideally, if you're creating a document like this, you can change the content of the headers and things like that so that it will match the text that you're following. So you can just type in this, for instance. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the values for the distribution curves. So in this first code section, I'm going to include and if you're not sure about the notation, you can always flip back to the original code. It's just a £, include equals true. And I'm going to create a sequence of X values. And since I'm dealing with a normal distribution, or the t distributions for this example, I'm going to go from -4 to 4. The normal distribution, I could probably stop at 3, but the t distributions will have bigger tails, and so I want to see a little bit further out. And then I'm going to go by 0.1 so that I get a lot of detail. And then I'm going to use the denorm to get the points along the normal distribution. And then I'm also going to get the dt function to get the t distribution curve values. And I'm going to use 1 degree of freedom for my first example. And I'm going to use 4 degrees of freedom for my second example. And then for my third one, I'm going to use 50 degrees of freedom. So we can see how the curve changes as the degrees of freedom changes. And see, I do need this bar. So include equals true, that's better. And we're going to put that down here too. And now this section of code, I'm going to also replace with plotting them. So we're going to plot X and Y, type equals L, so as a line, and we're going to title the graph standard normal distribution compared to, and when you want a line break in the middle of your title, you do \n, and then you continue student T distribution for n equals 1. We'll do that in blue. N equals 4. We'll do that in red. And n equals 50. We'll do that in green. Not there. And then to add graphs to your plot, then we can use the lines function. That by default is going to add. There are other ways to add lines, but this will work just fine. Oops. And then these are my other 3 t-distribution graphs that I can plot on top of my normal curve. Now, that's great. So we're then going to have one more plot, one more block of code down here, so that we can convert the data that we have for our X's and our Y's to a data frame so that we can also create the graph in ggplot. And so to do that, I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to insert a code block. And the language, if you type R, it's going to come up. Just type R and hit OK. Now, this is actually a code block that actually took out my text block. So I'm going to undo that, put in some spaces, and then go back and do that again. Code block R. And if I want to include it, I can do that. Notice it says R up here. You can also copy and paste from a previous section if you don't want to do that. So if I were to, again, undo that. Oops, I'm undoing the wrong thing. If I were to undo, I can always delete it over here. I can also just copy and paste a section. Honestly, sometimes I like doing that better than dealing with the input. And because I'm going to include a lot of the same settings anyway. And so from here, I'm just in this new code block, I'm just going to create my ggplot. I'm going to pull in the library, and I'm going to call this data dist as the data for my distributions. And then as data frame, I'm going to cbind X, Y, Y1, Y2, and Y3 into my columns. And then ggplot data is data dist. AES is going to be x equals x. And then geom line. Now I'm splitting up my AESs, my aesthetics, because I want the lines to be built on different Y values. And I can specify color equals blue. And then I can also add things like a title, normal, distribution versus student T distribution with n equals 1, n equals 4, n equals 50. And I'm going to put in a break, a line break there. And once you are ready, now, obviously, if you were creating an actual document, you would want to go through and you would want to correct all of these things. So let's look at the graph in ggplot. And let's compare the curves in a base R graph. And we'll first create the values for our plots using the ddist version of the distributions. So you can change the text here and then have as much explanation or as little explanation as you feel is necessary to explain the outcomes. And then when you're finally ready to print everything, to save it to a file, then you have some options to just save it, render on save, or render. So I'm going to first save this so that I don't mess it up. So practice, that's all I'm going to call it. Save. And then I'm going to render it. Now, when it renders it, it's going to convert it into the HTML page, which is what I specified at the beginning that it was going to look like. So it's going to run. And here is our practice document. It's going to have the title and your name. It's going to have all of your text. Your links are here. Here's our code. And now the thing about this code, when it renders it, it's going to run it. And if there's any errors in the code, then it's not going to run. So what I strongly recommend, of course, is always create a document that has this code in it so that you can make sure that the code runs. You don't have any typos or anything like that. And then and then when you're sure that it works, then render your document, because otherwise, if you get errors, you may have a hard time fixing it. So here it's loaded all this into memory, and it's created our plot, and here's the outcome of our plot. Again, if you have the include false, then it won't include this code that you can see. But here's our plot. It looks like there might be something wrong with my red. There's something, the red line didn't plot. Not seeing an example. Maybe it's just hidden behind one of the other lines. And then the ggplot graph. Now this one plotted just fine. So weird. Oh, I have a typo here. The green plotted over top of the red. That's why I can't see it. See these typos. You could go back and fix that and just change that to Y3. And then here it all plotted correctly. And this is our ggplot version of the graph. Now, if you don't want this to all be on one line like this, you can absolutely, everywhere there's a plus sign, after the plus sign, you can put a line break so that it will appear more vertically stacked instead of this big long horizontal line. But because it has the slider, it's not that big a deal. But if you were to go to print this to PDF or something, then all of that stuff would get cut off. You can also put in commands to do things like suppress the warnings and things like that. So there are other things that you can do to modify your document so that it displays precisely the way that you want it to. Experiment with that setting that was originally there in our code blocks, the echo equals false, and see what that does in terms of what gets displayed and what doesn't get displayed. So for instance, maybe we wanted to give an example of some of this, but maybe not all of this. And so we could selectively remove, especially if we separated out various code chunks, we could selectively remove some of the commands that we didn't want, or just not include any of them, or what have you. So there are other options that you can experiment with. And really, you need to spend some time with it if you want to get comfortable with it, because I don't honestly use this as often as I probably should. And because of that, every time I go and I try to do something with it, I find that I have to like reteach myself everything. So if you use it on a regular basis, then this will all become second nature, and you'll figure out all the ins and outs of what Quarto can do for you. And when when I hit render, the HTML document automatically opened in the browser. And so this is what the document actually looks like once it's rendered. And when it did that, my screen switched, and the recording actually didn't switch. So this is what it looks like. And again, this is where my typo is. This should be a Y3, not a Y2. But this is my ggplot version. And because this is an HTML page, you can save this page. So save as, and save it as an HTML file. It will save the like the images and everything in a subfolder. So you can see it's saved here as your practice document. But you can also save this, or you can save it as HTML only. You can save it as a single file. And you can also, again, I just resaved it. You can also print it here. So if you want to print this, once you're happy with it, to a PDF, then you can save it as a PDF and it will print. You could save it as is to your computer. Now, again, the spacing, depending on how big the graphs are and things like that, the page breaks may be in weird places and the slider obviously won't work. So you may need to, for instance, put in line breaks in different places. So for instance, in the plot, anytime you have a function like this after one of the commas, you can put a break and then it will continue on to the next line. In ggplot, you can always do this also after a plus sign, and then it will go down to the next line so that you don't have to rely on these sliders. If you really want this code to appear on the page, then on the HTML page, you have the sliders, but on the PDF, you won't. And so that will be something you will have to fix before you go in to save it as a PDF. And then you can save this anywhere on your computer. So again, we go back to R and we have the following code. And again, feel free again to tweak it and modify it. There's that error. And let's see if we can space this a little bit more and we'll try re-rendering it again. This title is still going to be very long. And so it may not all appear. In here, we can just do this. And maybe that. And that. And then that. Again, this title is going to be quite long. It may not all appear on the page. Space that out a little bit more. And then see what that does. Yeah. So here is our re-rendered document. I fixed the 3. So now we have all 4 lines, which is great. This title is not as badly cut off, but it is still very long. And so it is still cut off a little bit. This appears much better because we did the line breaks after the plus signs, and we still have our graph here. So again, this would be a little slightly better shape. Ideally, you would want to provide a little bit more explanation for a document like this, but nonetheless, and again, we didn't suppress the warnings. But this is essentially how it all works together.